Today, we're going to show you how to replace the coil cable on the Force Pro trolling motor. For this process, you will need a number 1 and number 2 Phillips head screwdriver, a 2.5mm hex bit driver, 3mm hex bit driver, and 2 4mm hex bit drivers, a 10mm socket, a wrench, torque wrench, and clippers. For this install, the trolling motor will need to be stowed and deployed. Make sure you have room on the boat for these actions. First, remove power from the trolling motor and disconnect the transducer cable from the back of the chart plotter. Remove the 4 screws holding the shaft cap using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Lift the top of the shaft cap. Next, disconnect the USB cable. Push the lever and disconnect the data connection. Now, remove the shaft cap. Clip the zip ties holding the positive and negative wires using the clippers. Pull back the rubber sleeves on the power cables to expose the terminals. Next, loosen the set screws on the power and ground cables using a 2.5mm hex bit driver. Disconnect the power and ground cables in the shaft cap. Next, remove the 4 small black screws holding the coil cable bracket in the shaft cap using a number 1 Phillips head screwdriver. Slide the cable bracket off the coil cable and remove it from the opening on the bottom of the shaft cap housing. Now remove the coil cable from the shaft cap. Keep note of the amount of coils your trolling motor has when removing. The coil count will need to be the same when reinstalling. Remove the cable clips holding the transducer cable and coil cable together. Keep these in a safe place. They will need to be used again. Remove the bracket that secures the power cable using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Remove the 2 cable clips holding both power and transducer cables to the mount using a 3mm hex bit driver. Remove the cable clips holding the transducer cable and coil cable together. Remove the power cable through the mounts channel, followed by the transducer. Now deploy the trolling motor. Remove the 9-pin data cable attached to the e-box. Next, remove the top pivot pin screw and washer using two 4mm hex bit drivers. Remove the pivot pin. Be careful when removing the pin. The trolling motor will swing forward. Pivot the upper link away from the steering servo housing. Remove the bracket that secures the power cable to the steering servo housing using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Pull the rubber shields away from the power cable connectors. Remove the nuts and washers that secure the power cable connectors using a 10mm socket. Next, remove the power cable from the steering servo housing. Remove the 3 screws that secure the coil cable block to the steering servo housing using a 4mm hex bit driver. Pull the coil cable block away from the steering servo housing to remove it. The coil cable block connects to the PCB in the steering servo housing. When removing the block, take care to avoid damaging the connector on the PCB. Take the new coil cable and place the coil cable block over the connector on the steering servo housing and push it into place, taking care to avoid damaging the connector. Insert and tighten the 3 screws to secure the coil cable block to the steering servo housing using a 4mm hex bit driver. Torque the 3 screws to 17 inch-pounds. Place the power cable connectors over the bolts on the steering servo housing, with the red cable on the bottom right positive terminal and the black cable on the upper left negative terminal. Install the nuts and washers that secure the power cable connectors using a 10mm socket. Tighten the nuts to 60 inch-pounds using a 10mm torque wrench. Pull the rubber shields down to cover the power cable connectors. Next, install the rubber gasket around the power cables. Install the 2 screws to the bracket that secures the power cable to the steering servo housing using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Take the coil cable and wrap the cable the same number of coils as the previous cable to the shaft. Pivot the upper link to the steering servo. Align the steering servo motor with the upper links. Push the pin through the holes on the upper link of the mount and the steering servo housing. Secure the pin using the screws and washers on both sides using 2 4mm hex bit drivers. Reconnect the 9-pin data cable to the e-box. Then stow the trolling motor. Take your transducer cable and route through the cable channel located on the side of the mount. Then, follow with the power cable through the same channel. Make sure to route the transducer through the channel first. This will make installation easier. Place the cable clips over the transducer and power cable. Secure the cable clips with the 2 screws using a 3mm hex bit driver. Place the remaining cable clip in the slot on the side of the mount, securing the power and transducer cables using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Place the cable clips back on to hold the transducer cable and the coil cable together. Insert the coil cables into the bottom of the shaft cap. Slide the cable bracket on the coil cable and reattach it to the bottom of the shaft cap housing. Tighten the 4 screws provided in the service kit using a number 1 Phillips head screwdriver. Using a 2.5mm hex bit driver, tighten the set screws on the power and ground cables. Slide the rubber covering back over the power and ground cables. Secure the power and ground cables to the bottom of the shaft cap using 4 zip ties. Reconnect the USB cable and the data cable to the antenna box. Place the lid on the shaft cap. Install the 4 screws to secure the lid of the shaft cap using a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Finally, connect the trolling motor back to power and the transducer into the back of the chart plotter. Test the trolling motor by powering on from the power button located on the E-box. And that's it. Thanks for watching. For more help, please subscribe to the Garmin Support YouTube channel and visit marinesupport.garmin.com.